So this is a time for questions or comments or discussion. So feel free to bring up anything you'd like. We have just about a half an hour. Yes?
So I had this question before the meditation, and I felt like the meditation gave me like a break from the low break from too much thinking. And then after the meditation stopped, this question popped right back up. Like, if the unborn, all that stuff, like, does not give birth / stuff to the born or whatever other stuff you just said, how does that allow us to cultivate our mind? Exactly? Like, why are we able to give anything to the world, to serve the world?
Why are we able to give anything to serve the world? Is that the question?
Or we're giving, we're giving nothing.
How are we giving nothing?
Are we giving nothing?
Are you giving nothing?
I'm not unborn yet.
Not unborn yet. Interesting sentence. So, if I'm not mistaken, what that sentence means is I am giving something. Correct?
Seems like it, and...
Good.
But I don't
do that.
Consider myself totally liberated either.
You don't need to. You can just give what you can give.
It just still seems like the unborn and whatnot has no... or it just sounds like it's... When you say it does not give birth to the born or something, it just seems like, wait, are those two even connected somehow? Or it sounds like they're not. But maybe I just feel like I'm misinterpreting something.
Are they connected somehow? Everything that is born is connected to everything else that is born. Okay? Does that make sense?
Okay, yeah.
That which is unborn isn't connected to anything at all. Does that make sense?
I don't see how they're related.
Do they have to be related?
Not saying they have to be related.
I think your question may be something more like, how is it possible to walk a path from being born to liberation? How is it possible, here I am, I'm living my life, how is it possible to attain liberation? To be free? Is that your question?
Not exactly. I wonder if this is... It just sounds confusing. Like, what is going to...
What?
If liberation is not connected at all to like what is born, then it doesn't seem like it's connected to, the world that we want to serve. That's what it seems like.
So it isn't so much about finding some way that liberation is connected to the world that we're serving. It's about finding a path that leads from suffering to the end of suffering. It's about finding a way to walk as a person who is born beyond birth and death. That's the question. Isn't that the question?
I guess the question is, wait, is liberation? Yeah,
Is liberation what?
Could I give it a shot at? I think I kind of understand the force behind the inquiry. Perhaps it's about basically how is it that complete liberation and unattachment leads to compassion and being of service in the world? Is it something more like that?
Yeah. That feels closer. And I feel like I could be, I'm in a state of mind that somehow that's confusing.
Well, it's important to work with these questions until we have a sense of what they are. It's very important to clarify a question before answering it. Because if we ask a question that isn't clear, then we get an answer that isn't clear. So it doesn't seem that we're quite clear on the question yet. Is that right? Or is it sufficiently clear?
It doesn't, yeah, maybe it doesn't seem clear, doesn't feel clear.
So one question that we've discussed is, how is it that we walk from suffering to the end of suffering, from being overwhelmed through all of this accumulation to relinquishment? That's one question that we've talked about. I brought that one up in response to what you said. And that is simply the spiritual path. There is a way to do it. If you walk that path, then you relinquish, you relinquish everything. And through non-clinging, the mind is free. That's how you do it. So there is a way, a certain way of looking at things, a certain way of thinking, a certain way of interacting with others, a certain way of making a livelihood, a certain way of doing meditation, and that leads to relinquishment. This is very carefully described, and that's the part that really matters. It's common for us to get very caught up in a lot of philosophical questions, forgetting that the question that matters is how we transcend suffering. That's what matters. How do we resolve these problems? So we can ask, what's the relationship here? But the fact is that when I say something like the unborn isn't related to anything, that's all that it really is a suggestion that you stop thinking about it. Because you're not going to be able to think about it. It's not like anything. There's no way to conceptualize it. It's not even an it. It doesn't even exist, much less not exist. And yet there is such a thing as the realization of nirvana. There is such a thing as the realization of the unborn. And so you don't need to have any more philosophical information. You just need to know that this path does lead to liberation from suffering. And so the next question is, what is the path? That's what I want to know. And we lay that out. We lay that out very clearly, which is, see the world as meaningful and is based on cause and effect, and in particular, ethical cause and effect. And if you do good, caring things, such as give, then you will be happy. There's a way that is structured. Beyond that, you should be very careful around your thinking. Your thinking should be about relinquishment, and it should be about not hurting anyone, and instead compassionate relationship. You then have to work out those actual relationships in the way you talk to people and the way you connect with people. You have to live in good ways and in fact make a livelihood in a good way. The way you engage in the economy should be about service, should be somehow about giving, not getting. How does that work? It should be caring, not harmful. How does that work? We work on all this. Having done that, we make efforts in meditation and are capable of actually relinquishing everything, even the underlying tendencies to accumulate. When we do that, then we don't need to theorize anymore. We don't need to come up with philosophical explanations because we know nirvana for ourselves. So that's the first question that we tried to phrase for you, but it may not be exactly the question. The other question was, how does enlightenment result in compassion? And that is that, you could say, a fun way to talk about it anyway, is that it doesn't. But because one has given up everything, then everyone's suffering, everyone's desire to take from us is simply met without resistance. And so everyone's suffering becomes my compassion, not because I'm trying to be compassionate, but just because everyone's suffering. I means the one who is awakened. Yes? Not me, but the one who is awakened. So it isn't about, I'm going to be compassionate and save you now, good thing I'm around. It's not like that. It's not about, now I have some really good thing, and once you get it, you'll be good like I am. It's not like that at all. It's not about, as was put in the question, good news, I have meditation that can fix you. It's not like that. And in fact, if a person thinks in that way, the amount of help they can give is relatively small. It's not nothing, but it's relatively small compared to not thinking, good news, I have something that can fix you, and then you'll finally be the way I think you should be, and that'll be better. Instead of that, whatever is asked, people suffer. People see themselves, each other, the world as untrustworthy, and we naturally respond to that. Like if you go out here and you're crying, you're wailing, the woods actually echo that sound back to you, and you can hear it. That's all. An enlightened person is just like that echo. They just respond without meaning to, and that's called compassion. They're willing to do that constantly because they have no resistance to suffering either. So they enter into the world of suffering without any resistance. And then they're used up by the needs of the world, and then they die. I'm aware that you may have now another way to put it, but I think it's time that we continue on, and you can just keep on exploring the question. I have the sense that the most important part of this question is your own exploration of it. Yes?
I think the relationship between the two poems you shared provides insight into this exploration.
And what is that relationship?
I liked how you emphasized not getting caught up in the second poem and losing appreciation for the first poem. Mm-hmm. I noticed that I wanted to try to understand the tree not being there and the nothingness and the emptiness, and that seems to be the answer to all of this. However, I was reflecting in this conversation how it doesn't seem to be possible to fully appreciate the second poem if you haven't fully appreciated the first poem.
Beautiful.
The first poem seems to be pointing to the path that we are walking. And if we don't fully walk that path, we're only just caught in concepts of a Bodhi tree not being a Bodhi tree.
Well said. Yes. As you know, I did some training in Zen. I don't teach Zen, but I was helped by it a great deal. And so because I have such I have several years of experience in a Zen monastery and love it very much. I think for that reason I can be critical. One of the problems with Zen is that even though what we're talking about now is a Zen story, Zen people often try to take the shortcut that you're prescribing, that you're advising we not take. And they try to just skip ahead to the end and say, oh good, I get emptiness. I'm really wise now. And all of that other stuff is stupid. But that isn't a useful way to approach it. So I appreciate your clarity and the way you express that clarity on this point. Yes?
So if trees and animals are living in direct harmony and without ignorance, why is it considered to be a lower birth to be born as a non-human living being? And does that make Buddhism inherently a humanist philosophy? And related to Native American traditions, how does Buddha, and maybe this is a good precursor for Jim Bruchak's visit, how does Buddhism and Native American philosophy, I know that there's a wide range of Native American philosophy, how do they compare? Or what are the main similarities or differences between the two?
Large question. So first of all, according to the Buddhist tradition and also according to my own observations, animals, nature is not living in perfect harmony. There's a lot of suffering and selfishness in the animal realm. Of course, it's less destructive than humans generally are. That's clear to me, but it doesn't mean that there's no greed, hatred, and ignorance at all. So I'd question your assumption that you stated at the beginning of your question. In terms of humans being a higher birth or animals being a lower birth, you could, of course, it's sometimes put that way. It's generally understood that humans can cause a lot more trouble. And so it isn't that it's inherently a better birth. However, there is something special about a human birth. There are things that are special about an animal birth also. Yes, you're probably not going to do as much harm as most humans do, so that's good. There are things that are special about a divine birth, being born in heaven, which is that you're probably quite comfortable. Almost all of the time you're very you don't have much to do and things are great. So that's good. But there's something good about the human realm. There are bad things about the human realm also, but there is something good about it, and that is that we're capable of aspiring to enlightenment, at least at a frequency higher than others. I wouldn't say it's impossible for others to do that, but it's extremely rare. Humans do it more. It's also extremely rare for humans, but relatively common. Meaning, almost no one does it. Almost no humans do it, but that's still relatively high. And so it's the aspiration for complete enlightenment that is the opportunity that we have as humans. Because we can aspire in that way, we can then experience a compassion for all beings. We can see the value and the beauty in all beings. In an interesting way, these frogs, I'd say, live in more harmony with the beauty of all beings than most humans do. But some humans are capable of experiencing and valuing the beauty of all living things in a way that I would guess those frogs do not. Because we have the ability to awaken to that, it can transform us and in fact liberate us from this whole mass of suffering. And so in that way, it's special. It's not that it's especially special. It's just special because every realm is special. They're different, and therefore they're different benefits, and the human realm has this particular benefit, and so that's the one that we emphasize, and it's a very important benefit. Not that everyone takes the opportunity, but it's available. In terms of the well, I guess I say, so then we should understand the human realm to be quite dangerous. We can do a lot of harm, and most people do, but it's an extreme, but there is a great opportunity, which is to directly see the inconceivably precious nature of all living things, and then live by that, and in fact transform others' lives so that many more people live by that. So that's good. I myself have been worried about the problems with humans for a long time, for most of my life, and I had to admit eventually that the problems that we have, they're worse than other animals, but that is a quantitative difference, not so much a qualitative difference. You couldn't say that humans are evil in a different way. We're just evil to a different degree. And that's because we have a certain capacity, but we can turn that capacity back on itself and become liberated from it. And in that way, care for all beings. So that it's important for us to appreciate that. That's a big deal, that we could escape from, if you look at it from the perspective of science, from 4 billion years of eating each other and killing each other and taking resources from each other, and the ones who survive are the ones who could steal better. We could break free of that is really quite an amazing opportunity. In terms of the relationship between the two, as you yourself said, it's very difficult because Buddhism is itself quite diverse, but, quote, Native American philosophies, as you put it, Native American spiritual traditions, are diverse in a way that few of us really appreciate. And we want to package them all together, and it's risky to do that. So I hesitate to even try to answer that question. So take this sort of answer with a desire to further explore it rather than take it as some kind of final answer. But a lot of the time in many native traditions, hopefully that's enough of a disclaimer, what's emphasized is our relationships. And again, I would say that if you're only going to learn one thing, then don't make it Buddhism. Make it, as you call it, Native American philosophy, whatever that is. Because it's very important for us to see that we're all related. And if you don't have that, then don't go off in your special philosophical Buddhist direction. You have to really see that. If Buddhism can give you that, then that's fine. But that has to be the foundation, that we're all related. If you see that, then it is possible in a Buddhist context to become liberated from this web of life. If you do that, then from another Buddhist context, it's possible to be of service to all life. Okay. Yes?
This question is a bit tongue-in-cheek, but I did the technique.
Yeah.
It was a source of suffering.
Uh-huh.
What is wrong with me?
What was the source of suffering?
Watching thoughts die.
Was a source of suffering.
Yeah.
So at the moment that they die, as you say, as they pass away, you're suffering. Correct?
Maybe like a fraction of a second after it was gone.
Great, so it's gone, there's nothing there, and that's awful.
Yeah.
Correct? Great. So this is a great question. If there is, I guess I should back up. A lot of the time we take, so this is a very good question because you can explore it at many levels. A lot of people, as they meditate, have some kind of experience of an answer to this question. In other words, the thing I'm about to say, they have seen. And to those people, I would say, the person who's asking the question now has dedicated her life to this path for a long time. Years of full-time training. It's unlikely you're as deep as she is. So beware of your answer. It may not be as deep as you think. There may be deeper levels to find. Nonetheless, it's not that it's a different answer, it's just a different level of the same answer. So, when we cling to something, hoping that it will support us, when it passes away, because of that, because of the clinging to something that we can't depend on, we suffer. Yes? The person who arises based on the support of that thing that we're clinging to suffers because the thing that it depends on is passing away. Yes? That's the reason suffering arises. And so what's important to see is that that person is not you. That person is not you. That person is not yourself. The person who suffers is not yourself. You are not a thought. You are not a feeling. The person who arises dependent upon thoughts and feelings is not you. It is not yourself. So yes, there is suffering. That suffering is not self. Next question.
So that the path is about letting go of all productions, constructions, things brought into being. As that relates to practice, that makes me think that I should stay with my experience as it is instead of trying to produce some other experience, even if I'm tight or constricted or feeling gross in some way. So if my technique
that's a part of practice, yes. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
If my technique is to say feel body sensations, when is it appropriate to just stay with those body sensations even if they're not feeling good versus cultivating some emotion that might feel better but that seems constructed?
Yeah. And the answer is whichever technique you chose to use, that's when. So if you chose to use a technique in which you're producing better feelings, that's the time to produce better feelings. If you chose a technique that means that you stay with it and don't construct it or manipulate it, then that's the time that you don't construct it or manipulate it. Both of these are valid. The Buddha talks a lot about cultivation of mind, about cultivating good qualities, bringing forth skillful states. Talks a lot about that. Emphasizes it as you should effortfully bring forth, cultivate, and then protect these good states. Make sure that they come forth and make sure that they stay present. It isn't that we don't do that. It wouldn't make much sense to say that we shouldn't do that, because here we are in this pattern of production. You have to use production to go beyond production. You have to use constructions to go beyond constructions. And if you try not to do that, that's a construction. That itself is the thing you're claiming not to be doing. So you can say, well, I'm producing things, therefore I shouldn't be producing things, so I'm going to stop myself from producing things. But the very act of stopping yourself from producing things is an act of producing something. You're producing the prevention of something. So you should cultivate good states, definitely. If you look at meditation techniques, most of them include some kind of cultivation of some kind of positive, skillful state. Do that. When your technique will define in what ways you are producing and in what ways you are not. Therefore, in whatever way your technique says produce, produce. In whatever way it doesn't say that, don't. So of course, I could answer the question in terms of under what circumstances should you produce what things, but that would take years of constant lecturing to cover the topic. So you should spend years of constant meditating to cover that topic. You should learn it's under these circumstances, under those circumstances. Of course, there are general guidelines, which we don't have time to go into right now, so I'm going to explain. Instead of that, you have a technique, produce in the ways that that technique says produce, don't produce in the other ways. In that way, you bring forth skillful states and protect them, while you bring to cessation, you stop, you let go of unskillful states so that they vanish. Then you make sure that those unskillful things don't arise again. You make sure that the skillful ones are continued and are brought to completion. And in that way, you walk this path from suffering to the end of suffering, from that which is untrustworthy to that which is perfectly trustworthy. What is the next one? Yes.
So your talk was about whether or not we are fundamentally flawed.
Yeah.
You have at times chided this generation or this group for focusing a lot on healing. And I'm wondering your perspective on healing, specifically as it relates to things like bioemotive framework, circling, shadow work. My question would be, if the Buddha were born today, do you think he would see these as important modalities that can be used to wake up? Or do you think he would really focus on samadhi and meditation solely as the way to the path?
I don't have a way of theorizing about what the Buddha would do today. All I can tell you is that the Buddha was not born today. That actually matters. He chose to be born then, there, for a reason. He could have been born at any time in any place. He was waiting in Tushita heaven for a long time for the appropriate circumstances to arise, and that, there, was what he chose. We have many ways of interpreting that, but one of them is, these aren't the best circumstances for a Buddha to be born in. Now it's our time to make use of those teachings in order to work with this circumstance, but that's our job. We're the ones who were born here and now. So we have that responsibility, and trying to theorize about what he would do under these circumstances is, well, it's just counterfactual in a way that may not be helpful. In terms of how to use those things, of course we should use those things. We should use everything. There's truth and value in everything. So naturally, we should use it. The challenge for us isn't, I'm not saying you shouldn't heal or something. I'm not saying you shouldn't use those frameworks. I have used those frameworks. I'm simply saying that it's, on the one hand, very easy for us to get caught in those frameworks. And on the other hand, we should carefully ask whether those frameworks were really developed in such a way that they lead to liberation. If our goal is liberation, then were they developed not only intentionally, not only explicitly, but masterfully for the purpose of liberation? If they hold certain residue of the mind that we're trapped in, then when we finish using them, we will still be trapped in that mind. Even if we do them perfectly. And the main thing I'd advise you all in is this is a big statement, which is hard for us to hear. If you are certain that something isn't going to work, don't do it. And that may seem like not a big statement, but if you can get through your life just following that one piece of advice, you've done a lot. If you are certain that something is the wrong thing to do, if it isn't going to actually solve the problem you're setting out to solve, don't do it. That's for me, other people I know, it's a really hard piece of advice to actually follow. Now, I'm not saying that these things don't work. I didn't say that. The same way that I didn't say that empiricism is bad. They have their use, and we should use them to that end. But we, especially we who have such power, we who have spent such time and energy appropriating mental and physical possessions from around the world and exporting our views, we especially should be humble in the face of the world situation and deeply question whether we really are the experts, even on the subject of our own healing, much less on the subject of other people's healing.
My question is related to Dan's question.
Mm-hmm.
What draws me very much to Indigenous spirituality and the thing that I can't find in Buddhism personally is this very specific reverence for the spiritual cosmic connection and power that animals have and to humanity. As like a gift.
Yeah,
An
right.
example is whenever there's news of a beached whale, there are 3 kinds of reactions across the human consciousness. There's the whale was an idiot, the whale was a victim to human maritime technology, and the indigenous response, those tribes that are connected intimately, some sort of intuitive connection to these pods of whales, will say that the whale did it intentionally, and the whales amongst their pod jostled to be the chosen one, the Christed one, to get to deliver this message to humanity around the vast extent of the situation we're in. And I just don't, I'm afraid to ask this question because I'm afraid of being called sentimental or something, but I don't understand like why that's missing this practice. That's my perception.
Yeah. So first of all, I see your point. And that's the reason that I, after training for many years in Buddhist monasteries, trained for many years in the traditions of a few tribes on this continent. Because I also didn't find that mysterious, sacred relationship in the same way. And therefore didn't feel connected enough with the earth, and therefore didn't receive in particular, what we were just talking about, the sort of healing that I, at that point, needed. So the first thing is, I see your point. It's a good point. And it's something that Buddhism is lacking in. I would agree with that, actually. Buddhism is one more constructed thing, and it has its strengths and it has its weaknesses. I think, how do I say it? I don't think it's reasonable to say that Buddhism should have everything in it. Partially because it's asking too much of Buddhism, but also because then you're sort of claiming the ideal case would be one in which all these various traditions are made obsolete. But why would that be? Buddhism can do what it does well. It doesn't have to do these other things well because other people are doing that well. And it doesn't have to be that we say this is good and therefore all that stuff is bad. That, I think, is actually the underlying problem with the way we look at this issue. That we humans, we like taking sides. And we want to say, good news, I found this thing, and it's the right thing, and all the other things are the wrong thing. The Buddha actually criticized this explicitly. He said that, what is a bad Sangha? What is the definition of a bad Sangha? A bad Sangha, he makes different points, but one of them is a group of practitioners who think only this is true and everything else is wrong. If a Sangha is held together by that, then that's a bad Sangha. That isn't a skillful Sangha. And he was talking about he was talking to the monks. The Sangha in this case means if we start doing that, then we have made a mistake. We should not behave in that way. That isn't the point. It isn't this is what's true and that is what's wrong. So I'd say I would say you're right, that is lacking, but I would say that it's okay that that's lacking. Buddhism doesn't have to do that. Buddhism has limited resources. And so it does its thing. It says, good news, we offer this. That may be the right thing for you. If so, please practice it. If there are other things, well, good news, please practice that tradition or that tradition or that tradition. The last thing I'd add, though, is that really isn't absent from Buddhism. And these connections, I had this experience too, and I went into those native ceremonies and realized a kind of connection with animals that, well, like you say, I would have previously said was stupid and sentimental and childish. I would have, And then I saw, oh, this is not stupid or sentimental or childish. And it isn't just intelligent and whatever the opposite of sentimental is, present and clear and mature. It is alive. This really matters. And we need this. This is essential. And so with that kind of experience, with that new kind of mind, in which, yes, animals tell us things. And like you say, when we talk about it, we're afraid people are going to say that's stupid. But we should hold our ground and say, you can look at it that way, but the idea that that is stupid is produced by your own mind. This is crucial. This is something that has been lost and is endangering all of us, that it has been lost. But it hasn't been lost completely. And you can change your life and go and find it. And if you're going to do that, I wouldn't recommend that you try to import it into your life. I'd recommend that you get out of your life and find it. Because your life is based on the assumption that these aren't real things, which is why people resist them so much. Because it's a big price to be paid. You understand? Wait, you're saying that in order to realize the wisdom of the porcupine, I have to make less money? I mean, you have such an incentive to not believe that porcupines have wisdom. You're being paid to believe that. So but I would say you should make the sacrifice and get out there and sit under a tree and meet a porcupine. And realize that it has something to say. And you've needed to hear that. And it needed to meet you. It's been waiting. But you've been waiting. And so do it. That matters. So with the realization that this is real and significant, I did eventually go back to the monastery and brought it up with the Roshi. And I asked a similar question to the one you just asked. And he just said, oh, yes, yes, yes. And said, oh, yes. And here are and he just right away brought up all these examples and Buddhist history of this happening and how that helped different monks at different times and inspired them and in the way that he does, sort of excited about it and and so it's not absent. I think the way that we especially that we understand. Okay, I guess I have to. This is taking a long time, but I'm going to back up again because another thing happened that really matters. Sorry, you can laugh at me. It's okay. So this is important to me. So I was talking to a Christian, as you know, who said something really similar. He said, I just can't get into Buddhism because Buddhism doesn't teach anything important. And I said, what do you mean? And he says, it doesn't teach about what happens after you die. It doesn't teach about cause and effect regarding ethics. It doesn't teach about the spiritual realms, about anything other than just the modern human world. It doesn't teach you how to live your life. It doesn't teach you any of that. So why should I care about Buddhism? And some of you know this, and some of you know the person who said this to me. And I was just stopped. And I had to admit two things. One, you're right. The Buddhism that we have nowadays doesn't teach anything important. But then I had to admit something much, for me at the moment, worse than that. The fact that it was worse than that for me at the moment is very sad evidence of my character. But worse even than that was that I had to admit I'm complicit in that. The Buddhism I'm teaching is meaningless. because it doesn't talk about any of that. Because I have just gone in on this modern thing. But that's a creation that a lot of people have made decisions, you know, and each one of them has made a decision to change it a little bit so it's a little bit more in accord with the ordinary narrative. And I have to, because I need to make enough money to keep on teaching. And if I don't provide these people with an appropriately deep experience in less than 7 days, they're not going to come back next year, and then I won't have income, and then I have to work at Exxon. And I don't want to do that, and so I don't know what to do, and I'm going to just change it a little. And then time passes, and you have this, and you have to ask, what are we even doing now? Which is why I said, if you're clear that something is wrong, don't do it. And that alone is very hard advice to follow. Just that is hard to live. But we do it, and I had to admit, as I talked to this guy, that's what I've been doing. That is exactly what I've been doing. And I can't do that anymore. And I don't know what's going to happen now that I'm going to stop teaching this thing that people came up with recently that they call Buddhism so they can sell it because it's a nice product. It's had good marketing. I can't be part of that. And so I'm going to start going the other way. And it was even harder to do it the appropriate way, which is that you don't just leave it, but you drag it with you. So that it would be actually even easier to just leave it, which is what I, as you know, wanted to do. Just leave. But then I thought, no, we're going to drag the whole edifice back to where it's supposed to be and start talking again about virtue and about rebirth and about relationship and about meaning and about all of the points that he was saying, I have no reason to learn Buddhism. And in the same way, we nowadays have this kind of Buddhism that we just invented recently because it's in accord with the modern mind and economy. And that's how it got us to this point. And honestly, we should be grateful. And I know this is going to sound crazy, but I would suggest that you really, really do this. You really be grateful for all of these white and non-white Buddhists who have sold out year after year and decade after decade. Because all of us have benefited from that. We have. That's why we are here, because of that. Whatever else you want to say, the fact is, here we are. And that's what happened. And now we have the honor. They've established this whole thing on stable enough ground that we have the chance, the honor, to correct those wrongs. And again, we should be grateful. What would you prefer? You choose. Do you want to be the one to sell out? Or do you want to be the one to bring forth your integrity? If we're the lucky ones that we've gotten to this point, but we can't be complacent about that either. We have to then step forward and say, this is it. And one of the things about this is it is seeing how it is that there's such meaning. You look at the story of even the Buddha's life. There are many, which we don't see, stories about his relationship with animals. As he sat, he touched the earth, right? The whole earth shook. His relationship with the earth is what more important moment is there in his entire path than what happens at that moment, right before his awakening? He touches the earth. He has a relationship with the earth. It's demonstrated. A huge cobra comes and protects him. He has a relationship there. And that isn't it. As a child, he had experiences with animals that changed his life. And then you go back into the Jataka tales when that's all it's about. It's only about this. We just throw out the Jataka tales. That's stupid. Rebirth is dumb and animals are dumb. And so we don't include it. A lot of you probably don't even know what the Jataka tales are. Seriously. I mean, raise your hand if you know what the Jataka are. Right, so it's less than half of the people. We're at a supposedly, ostensibly Buddhist place of training, and most of the people here don't even know what that is. But that's what this is. It's talking about that. When the Buddha himself was a peacock, or whatever it was. And how those animals offer us wisdom. What specific types of wisdom? In what ways? How can we learn from that? All of that's included, and we don't even know. And so I feel like it's our job but again, I want to go back. The goal is not, good news, we're going to create a Buddhism that makes everything else meaningless and obsolete, because we're going to do everything. That is a weird and unhealthy attitude. That isn't the point. The point is we're going to do this truly. And then lots of people are going to do lots of things truly, and that's good. Because we don't have to do everything. We shouldn't do everything. But we should do our thing. We should do something. And we should do that thing well, completely, with integrity. And to that end, I would ask you, since I talked about this myself, I would ask you, please, if you wish, to review your own participation in this. Your own transformation, editing, abridging, filtering, manipulation of this tradition to fit your own assumptions, your own background. The things trying to make it so that it is something that accords with what you already think and live. I would ask you to be very careful about that, because it was very helpful for me when I was asked this question, and I had to admit I have been complicit and in fact participatory in making the thing that I love the most worthless, in killing the thing that I love. Trying to do good, but not trying hard enough, without the courage needed. And so I'd ask you to courageously review your own choices. How are you participating in, I know Buddhism is kind of good, but let's make it more like what I want, what I think, what I'm comfortable with, what I already believe. Wouldn't that make it more appropriate? And all of that. Wouldn't that make it more popular? It has to be popular after all. So otherwise, how are we going to help anybody? And none of that's wrong. It's just look for the lack of integrity. It should be popular. It should be good. All of that. I'm not against McMindfulness, as they call it. I'm a fan of McMindfulness. But the question again comes back to our own mind. With what integrity are we creating that?
So are you saying that a foundation, so that integrity is built on a foundation of non-integrity, because it takes non-integrity for people to know what integrity looks like?
Say that again?
Are you saying that the integrity that we're trying to move forward with now is built on a foundation of non-integrity?
I don't know if it's built on a foundation of non-integrity. I wouldn't put it in that way. It's the same as the earlier question about what are we fundamentally. I wouldn't say it's a foundation of non-integrity. It's just every person, every generation, every culture does what they can do and leaves the rest to the next one. And we now have the honor of having been benefited by what people have been able to do so far, but they failed at the hard stuff, and that's now up to us. Of course they failed at the hard stuff. It's the hard stuff. So now that's our thing. And I would hope that we could approach that with a sense of honor. Yes, we have the privilege of doing what others have not yet done. Good for us. Let's step forward and try that. And so, in that way, we base it on integrity. We base it on our own integrity. Okay? So I would hope on the one hand, we would try to bring in that aspect that is present in Buddhism. And I would also suggest that we not need everything to be in Buddhism. Buddhism can have its own strengths and weaknesses, just like everything else, and that's fine. Okay? Yeah, so thanks for bringing it up. It's obviously it's an important issue to me. I talk about it so long, destroy the evening schedule. But it matters. Very important. Okay. What's the plan? 8 o'clock? Maybe here? Is that good?
More like 8:02.
Okay, 8:02. This is one of our traditions. It has to be exact to the minute. At that time we'll return. So thank you to the person who sent this question. It's a great question. And thank you to that person and also to everyone else in this community for practicing with integrity for the benefit of the world.